and we'll get started. So thanks everybody for joining us today. This is our second Build Book Buzz webinar. A lot of you know my name is Leanne Garms. I'm a publisher and founder of BBL Media. And I'm joined today by Jandra Sutton. She's our digital marketing expert and a published author as well. Jandra, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And she's going to be running the technical side of things here too, so that is a big help for me. A little bit of housekeeping. So we're going to do about 40 minutes, 30 to 40 minutes of presentation for you over the topics that we promoted to you, and then we'll have a Q&A session about 15 or 20 minutes. Okay, yes, sorry about that. The music was loud. Okay, it's gone now. So on the right side of your screen, I believe, there you can see a little chat box. So feel free at any time during our presentation to go ahead and send a question if it pops to mind, and then we'll see if we can get to those at the end of our presentation, okay? Because we want to answer your questions and find out what you need most. Today, we are here to help you break through the author overwhelm. So that's what we're going to be attempting to do, and I think probably all of you are somewhat familiar with author overwhelm. There's a lot to do and to handle as an independent author, or if you're a publisher of your own books and other people's books. I'm sure that you've been familiar with that term. There's a lot to think about: your brand, your social media, your website, your book publicity, your blogging, social media, which Jandra is going to help us with today. And then, of course, there's sales and distribution. And really, when I think most of you want to get back to writing, and because that's what you love. And so that's why we're here. We want you to get back to writing, and we want you to publish the best book that you can and promote it and get the recognition that you deserve as an author. So I want to tell you just a little bit about myself, and then Jandra will tell you about her background. As some of you know, I regularly teach workshops at writing and publishing conferences across the country. Publishers and Writers of San Diego, the Next Bestseller Workshop in New York, which is coming up this fall, November, and the 805 Writers Conference. So author education is really important to what we do. This is a changing industry, and it's very challenging for authors to keep up with the latest information. So we've really started focusing on author education. My background is in journalism and public relations, traditional public relations. So for over 25 years, I've been helping clients of a variety of different clients, from nonprofits to authors to small businesses, create buzz for what they're doing and get attention in the media. And that's something that I really enjoy doing. I love working with the media. I love finding that backstory that gets the media's attention. And now I guess it's been about 6 years ago, I started Build Buzz Launch Media and then Media and Publishing. So we added a hybrid publishing imprint. So now we can help you either self-publish or publish through our hybrid imprint, and then promote your books and get recognized, raise your visibility, and hopefully sell your books. So that's what we do. On the digital marketing front, I'll turn it over to Jandra and let her tell you about her background.
So my name is Jandra Sutton, and I am a digital marketer and author. So I've been in digital marketing for about almost a decade now, and I've been doing it for a while. And as you can probably guess, social media has only really been exploding for the past decade. So I call myself a digital native because I've been using it since its onset, which I think has been really valuable in my career, and that I know how it's developed and how it's, gotten how it's come from point A to point B and where it's going to go in the future. I started working in publishing about 3 years ago, and I started working with Turner Publishing, which is based here in Nashville. That's a mid-sized publisher, and I was the director of marketing for about 3,000 titles, and I was a department head of one person, so I was the only person in my department for 3,000 titles. And then I left and I worked for PR by the Book, which is a literary PR firm, and I did digital marketing there for about 2 years. And I helped authors and publishers learn how to grow and build an awesome brand online. And then one of the things that makes my experience unique isn't just that I've got a lot of experience in digital marketing and in industry experience working on the marketing side of the publishing industry, but then I'm also an author myself. So I write fiction books, and I've been published in one nonfiction book, and then I'm working to get my fiction books published and to grow my brand. So I've been in your shoes, and I'm in them now, really. So I think that lends a little bit of expertise. And then also I have a little bit of bonus knowledge in the consumer end that I was a librarian. So that also helps because I know what libraries are looking for and what distributors are looking for. So I think it's a nice little balance that I can lend a lot of different types of knowledge and expertise that really help authors to do better.
That's great, Jandra, and I'm so excited to have your breadth of experience to offer our clients, and excited to work with you on this. Jandra's very talented, and I love it when we can get somebody who's been in the trenches as an author, because she can certainly relate. And while I've worked with a lot of authors and I've been in the trenches of the PR, I haven't been in the trenches as an author yet. We're working on our first book, so we're all in this together and learning together. So we've recently started offering our signature workshops. Find Your Path to Publishing is one, and Building Buzz for Your Books is the other. And we're offering those online so that we can reach more authors. Both Jandra and I are members of IBPA, the Independent Book Publishing Association. And one of the major goals of this professional organization is to raise the level of professionalism among indie authors. And to do that, author education obviously is a key. So that's our commitment to you and to the other authors out there. We want to help each of you raise the bar for your publishing and produce the most professional book you can and get the attention and sales that you deserve. So while this free webinar is an intro to our upcoming 3-week online course, you will get plenty of answers and how-tos and tips on how to start building buzz for your book right now. I really do not like those free webinars where you go and you spend 45 minutes with somebody and they finally give you the tips at the end, and it basically is a sales pitch. That's not what we're doing here. Today, we're going to jump into some of the most critical and often overwhelming tasks that you have to master as an indie author or publisher to create the following that you need and create your audience and sell your books. And those things are platform, publicity, and launch. So that's what we're going to be focusing on. And first up is building your platform. So what does that mean? Your platform is really, it's simply, and I love this quote. Yeah, there it is. It really is, it's made up of a lot of things, but basically it's your brand and your reach to a targeted audience. It's your visibility. And this quote from Christina Katz, she wrote the book, The Prosperous Writer. It's a great book. The word platform simply describes all the ways you are visible and appealing to your future, potential, or actual readership. So that's what it is. It's made up of a lot of things. But really, why do you need one? I know in publishing circles, in author circles, you hear this bandied about a lot. You need a platform, but what is it and why? Well, it plays a critical role when it comes to whether or not you're going to get a traditional or even a hybrid publishing contract. And it's equally important to self-published authors who are serious about their writing careers. Now, when we work with clients, we go back to your goal and what you're trying to accomplish. So it really, we look at what your long-term goals are. So if you are a serious writer, if you have more than one book in you, then you need to look at your platform and your branding to start with. If you're just going to do a biography or a family history, or you just have one book, one fiction book that's just been eating away at you and you have to get it out, that's fine. Maybe this is not for you, and that's great. We always go back to your goal. I wouldn't recommend you hiring publicists and building a big old website if you're just going to do one book. So if you are focused on a career as an author in some way, shape, or form, then you do need a platform. So think about where you're visible. Today, primarily, it's online, and it starts with your brand. Now, many people associate platform with their social media following, and Jandra is going to clarify that for you. It's a lot more than that. It starts with your brand, your website, includes your social media profiles, your press materials, which I'm going to go into detail about, any articles that you've written, your mailing list, your email list, your connection to influencers. That can be a really big help. One tip that I like to give authors is you do not have to have a huge mailing list yourself. Use the mailing list of other people. So find those big influencers in your market, and you can use their reach instead of or until you build your own. Jandra, you want to talk a little bit about branding, social media, and platform?
Yeah, so what I like to talk about with authors when they're building their platform and establishing their brand is a reminder that you all have a brand. Even if you don't have a social media presence, even if you don't have a website, you already are a brand. And that might sound counterintuitive because today we think about brands as companies, but that's not true. All of us have personal brands as well. So when you're building your author platform, you want to think about how that brand and those goals that you have identified, whether that's to establish a career as an author, and then what you want to do through that career. So for me, part of my brand is that I want to help reach young people and help equip them with the tools necessary to build the best life possible. So that's integral to my brand as an author. And so I use that and that goal to then build out my author platform. So how can I make those things come to pass? Not only my goal of having a writing career, but to do that targeted mission of helping young people. So for me, that includes having a website, using my social media, building my email list. An email list isn't as important for my individual audience just because my individual audience is much younger. So a lot of them don't use email for newsletters, things like that. But for other audiences, it's very different. And so I'm using all of those things to help build my platform and extend my reach so that I can then further my goals. And for me, and what I like to remind all of my authors, social media and building a platform isn't just about selling books. It's about the long term. So building your platform is about getting that long-term exposure over the lifetime of your career. Because when you're starting off, if you were to self-publish your book tomorrow, there's no guarantee that you're going to sell any copies, no matter how much you tweet about it, no matter how great your website is, or how good your mailing list is. If you don't have an audience that's built up, or if you're not going through the steps of building up your platform and generating buzz, then the sales won't come in. And so it's not just about that immediate return on investment, it's about the long-term yield. And so that's where author platform becomes very, very valuable, because it helps generate that interest and generate that buzz over the course of not only the next week, but the next month, the next year, and the next books that you put out.
That's a really good point, because what we're really talking about is, as you said, not just having a list of people. What you want is a relationship with those people. What you want to do in everything that you communicate is try to build that relationship and that connection with your reader, with your audience. So that's a really good point, that this is about building relationships and the long term. Also, it doesn't happen overnight. This is something that if you have not started, then you need to start as soon as we hang up. And it's something that hopefully is always growing. So you need to build, ideally you start building your platform before your book is even finished. And when we teach our course that's going to start in July, we're going to limit that to 15 people. And one reason is because we like a lot of interaction. I'm used to teaching face-to-face, and usually to smaller groups, sometimes in large ones, but I like to get the feedback of where you are, and I want to help you really make some headway on where you are with your platform and your marketing and building buzz. So we'll be limiting our course to 15 people so we can do that. I want to give you an example, for instance, of two different author platforms and what that might look like. And these are two clients that I've been working with. So here's a quick one. I won't belabor this because I want to stay on track with time. But author A has a beautiful website, no email list. Okay, maybe their family. A great book cover. It's a nonfiction biographical story. It's very well written. They're active on Facebook, and he speaks to small groups about his experiences. Author B is still in the writing phase with their book. She's an expert in psychology, working with young Latino women. It's a very targeted audience. She has a great website, consistent branding, an email list, free information to give away and position her as an expert. She's active on Twitter, Instagram, and has over 1,000 followers who are engaged, which is key. And she's done a few radio interviews. She writes articles. She's authored articles in the Huffington Post. And another key one is she has endorsements from key influencers in the industry who have their own reach. So that she gets to take credit for, or gets to count their reach in her platform. So author B doesn't even have a book yet, but she has some visibility, branding, and some reach and recognition in the market. She's a young Latina therapist, and her reach and branding would probably be enticing to a publisher. It would be to me if we were considering her, which we actually may. But you can see where some of that groundwork that a publisher would normally do has already been done. And that's the reality of publishing today. Publishing, as we all know, has changed tremendously. So you as an author, even if you are traditionally published, you've got to do a lot of the work. That's just the reality. And that's hopefully what we'll be able to help you with.
And that's something that I'd like to just touch on really briefly before we move on to the next slide. As someone who worked for a publisher, a traditional publisher, I can tell you so many authors come in thinking, I'm going to get a traditional publishing deal and my publisher is going to spend loads of money marketing my book and I'm going to make so much money because I'm going to sell so many copies and they do all the work for me. That's not the case. These days, with how big the publishing industry is and how saturated it is, and plus the introduction of self-publishing and how powerful that is, traditional publishers aren't actually putting that much money towards new authors. They're saving their marketing budgets for, the Danielle Steeles of the world, the J.K. Rowling, people like that. So the debut authors, yes, you get some support. So I'm not saying that there's no point in getting traditionally published. You get benefits like distribution and the name of a publisher, yada, yada, yada. But these are things that you're going to have to do on your own, whether you're self-published or traditionally published, which is why it's really important to do them. Because you can't expect that a publisher is going to help, because while they might not. And then if your book doesn't sell and you were traditionally published, the chances of you getting a second book are drastically reduced because nothing really happened with the first one, even if it's more the publisher's fault.
Right. And one of my my developmental editor, Bridget Boland, her first novel was published by Simon & Schuster, and she's a perfect example of that. You basically have about a 3-month window for your book to take off. And this was her experience, Simon & Schuster gave her a publicist. They focused on her, set up events, did a nice launch. But if you don't show the numbers, it's just a numbers game. It's the financial reality is they have to move on. So it's incumbent upon you to do what you can on your end. And when I get into the publicity part of it, I'll show you there are some things that you should do, you can do and should do prior to launching a campaign, whether you do it yourself or you're working with a publicist. And educating yourself on what that is it can be really beneficial and help you be more successful in any campaign that you do. I want to talk just a second about branding. We've been talking about branding here and there, but it really is a critical piece of everything that you do. You need to start with your brand, and as Jandra said, you have a brand already, but what you want to do is make sure that you hone that, be consistent, make sure that it translates across everything that you do, everything that you say, your tweets, your interviews on the radio, how you position yourself to the media, your graphics, your visual identity. It needs to say, this is me, and this is what I'm doing. If you have a solid and consistent brand, it gives you more authority, it gives you more influence, and it can allow you to have a higher pricing for your book, your speaking gigs, your programs, if you sell programs. So a solid, consistent brand is key. So let's move on to websites. So your website is basically you central. Now, I'm going to assume that each of you already has some sort of website, and if you don't, please call me immediately after we finish this. And it should be a full-fledged website, not just a blog site. A lot of authors have heard you've got to have a blog, and this is a good way to get started, which it probably is. But when you get ready to launch your book, you've got to have a full-fledged website that has some functionality. It has some of these things on here, your shareable content. It should educate and not be salesy. There should be a call to action, and testimonials are very important. I just worked with an author who has a book signing in Detroit, actually on Saturday, and she had a blog site when she started. And she worked with me on our publicity starter kit. So we got her ready to do some publicity, had some success with that, but we didn't pull the trigger on it until I tweaked her website just a little, because she just had a blog site. She had no way to capture emails, which is one of the primary reasons you want a website. You've got to build your list. She didn't have any buy buttons on her website. And there were a few other things that we had to tweak. Otherwise, if she got all kinds of coverage, she has a radio interview in Detroit and a print interview. But once that coverage comes out, if they go to a blog site and there's no way to engage, then it's a wasted effort and she's wasted her money. And that's one thing that I hate to see, is authors wasting their money. So before we finish this section, I'm going to give you 3 things that you can do with your website to help build your audience, which is one of the key reasons to even have one. First, Jandra's going to share a little bit of her perspective on websites with you.
So I have 2 recommendations that I give all of my authors when they're working on a website. And I actually have a past client of mine, Ken Zach, who is an author and poet. And he actually won an award last year for best website of an author because of my recommendations, and he came back very happy. So one of the things that I always tell authors to keep in mind is to keep the really important content above the fold. And what that means is when you're looking at a website, so let's say you pull up facebook.com, the fold is the bottom of your screen. So obviously, if you were to scroll down, there's more to Facebook than what you just see on your screen when you open it up. And if you put a lot of information, very critical information, below the fold, and it's not obvious that it's there, not a lot of people are going to scroll down unless what is above the fold is very eye-catching and very attention-grabbing. So if it's just white space, if there's nothing really there, if they can't navigate to the other places on your page, if there's not your name or your brand or your book, any of that kind of information above the fold that doesn't really, hook their attention, then most people aren't going to scroll down. You only have a couple of seconds online to capture some of people's attention. And that doesn't mean you need to shove all of the information at the top of the page. What it means is you have to have something to hook them and keep them on the page. And then the other thing that I recommend to authors is to make everything clickable. So a lot of times on author sites, they will do a buy button and they'll just have the button that you can click to buy the book. So I always tell people, make the book cover clickable, make the book title in the actual copy on your page clickable, things like that. Because today's day and age, we're used to clicking a lot, especially younger generations. If you've got a huge picture of your book and only a tiny little buy button underneath of it, people are probably their eyes are gravitating towards the book cover itself. And for a lot of links, your cursor will actually change as you hover over something that's clickable. So subconsciously, it encourages you to click. So obviously, you want that to happen on the bigger, more eye-catching real estate on your website, like the book cover, not just a tiny little buy button.
That's great, Jandra. Thanks. Some really good insight. We'll go in our course, we'll go into more depth and more detail to help you improve your website. And we'll actually, if you have one, we'll actually take a look at it. And I'll be giving you homework. We'll both be giving you homework each week for you to go and make some changes, put together some press kit pieces, some things like that. So we're going to meet once a week on Thursdays for 3 weeks for 90 minutes, and you'll have homework in between. So we will be actually working, and this is another reason that we limit it to 15, but we're going to be working on your project so that it's valuable to you. Okay, so I promised you 3 things that would help you start building your list and your audience today. We've touched on a few of them, but I'm going to reiterate those. So number 1, make sure you have an email capture sign up box on your homepage, and ideally on every page. Now, please don't just ask me to sign up for your newsletter. Yawn, I'm not going to do it. Give them something free and give it away. A free report, a tip sheet, an insider's view, parenting tips. We just did that with one of my clients. Suicide prevention tips for another client we did. Give them something tangible. Oh, other things, you can do quizzes also online. Find out what kind of parent you are. It's a quick little quiz that's kind of interesting to people. So give them something free, and you can get creative with it. It's a lot of fun. Some people actually go ahead and give away their ebook for a short amount of time. You don't want to always give that away. But the second thing is put a blog on your site. Don't make it the central part of your site, but having a blog on your site creates new content. You don't have to do it every single day. You don't have to do it every single week. Jandra probably has some stats on how often you should blog and do some other social media. But the reason you want a blog on your, ideally on your homepage, is Google indexes your website for new content. If you haven't updated your website in a few months, and I've seen websites that haven't been updated in a year, then it won't be indexed and you'll be harder to find. So blogs are the easiest way to keep your site updated. Calendars are too, but it helps in the search rankings and makes you easier to find. And if you can have your blog feed right on the homepage, that's helpful. Now, another tip for search optimization that I'll talk about later is online press releases, because those can pop you up in the search as well, but that's a different topic. So, and then the third tip for your website is make sure you have the buy buttons and an e-commerce function. So I always recommend that you not only, if it's possible, and it depends on what you're trying to do, but you not only sell on the other retail sites, but if you can, sell your book on your site. You get higher royalties, obviously, and you can also personalize books and start creating that relationship that we've been talking about. Okay. So, another thing you need is, did you talk about this? The social media buttons on your website. So that'll just put us right into social media success, and I'll turn it back over to you, Jandra.
So what we're talking about here, just this last little tie into websites, is making sure that your social media platforms are connected to your website. Your website is your landing page. It's really the place where people can find all of the information about you. And that includes any social media platforms that you're using to promote yourself and your books. So don't just have share buttons, the option for people to share maybe a blog post or your about page or whatever on your website. You also want to have the buttons for people to click to go to your profile. So a lot of themes for websites that are pre-made will have these buttons built in, and one of the biggest mistakes I see authors make is forgetting to actually update their links into those buttons. So make sure that people can find you on social media from your website, and then make sure that people from your social media can find your website. So to be successful on social media, it can be very overwhelming to think about, and that's why we talk about author overwhelm. With social media, there are so many different social media platforms out there, and it's hard to navigate which one you should be using, how often you should be posting, what types of things you should be posting. So what I always recommend to my clients is to take a breath, first of all, and we have to start with creating a strategy for your social media to make sure that it's easier to manage, there's less stress, and it's more effective, because social media isn't just about, tweeting things and tweeting a link to buy your book. It's about that long-term reward, which we talked about earlier. So what I always tell people is we want to focus your efforts to make sure that you have a high return on investment. And that return on investment, that ROI, isn't just financial. For social media, the investment is your time. So we want to get the biggest bang for your buck, meaning your hours, and put those hours to good use on social media and do that very smartly. So the first thing that I always recommend to my authors is to start with 1 to 2 platforms. 5 years ago, you hear about social media, someone's going to tell you, hey, you should get on Twitter and Facebook and YouTube and a blog and until suddenly you have 6 or 7 platforms to manage and no time to write, no time for a day job, and no time to tweet. So I always tell people to start with 1 platform, maybe 2, and grow from there. And I've had a lot of authors hear that and just breathe a sigh of relief because they thought that they needed to be on every single social media platform. But you don't. Think about where your reader is hanging out. For me, I'm a young adult author. Where are my readers primarily spending their time? They're not really on Twitter and Facebook as much. They are way on Instagram and Snapchat. So for me, I focus a lot of my efforts on social media on Instagram. But you also have to think about what platforms you engage with, what platforms you enjoy. Because if, for example, your audience is on Twitter, but you absolutely hate Twitter, you're probably going to resent having to use it, and you're not going to enjoy it. And if you don't enjoy it, it's going to show in your tweets, and you're not going to be as relational, and your audience isn't really going to connect with you and vibe with you if you're not enjoying your social media presence. Now, I know some of you might be thinking, I just don't enjoy social media at all. And unfortunately, you kind of have to learn to grow to love it. And a lot of authors that didn't like social media to begin with eventually do discover that they like it once they learn how to use it and which platforms they should be using. So another thing you need to consider when you're picking your platforms is how much time you have for social media. Twitter might seem like the obvious choice for someone who just wants snappy, rapid fire comments because you only have 140 characters. But one of the problems with Twitter is that it requires a lot more effort than, say, Facebook or Pinterest. Because with Twitter, there's so many tweets going out every single second that there's a lot of competition and there's not a lot of sticking power. And what we talk about is the shelf life of posts. So a post that you put on Pinterest, for example, has a much longer shelf life, meaning that people can still see it and might still stumble across it in the next month, 2 months, year, versus on Twitter, it's snap, less than a second. So that can be really difficult for someone who doesn't have a lot of time to dedicate to the platform. And then the last thing you want to think about are what are your goals for social media? Your goals for social media are going to help define which platforms you're using, how you're using them, and what content you're sharing. So if, for example, one of my goals is not only to build interest in my books, but maybe to help me get published, then it might be useful for me to be on Twitter because the publishing industry is very active on Twitter. So I'm interacting with agents and publishers and editors and people like that on Twitter and interacting with the book community, which is going to help further that goal of getting published. My goal is to help connect with young people and help improve their lives, I might be focusing on things like having personal conversations with my followers on Instagram, and having Instagram stories that are really interesting and unique and motivational. And then how my goals translate into not only which platform I'm using, but what type of content I'm sharing is very important as well. So with the type of content you're sharing, you have to think about what your goal is. Once again, it's not just to sell books. So you can't just post on social media, hey, I've got a book. Do you want to buy my book? Check out my book. Here's a link to my book. Buy my book. Because I can guarantee you that if all you do is post, buy my book, buy my book, buy my book, people will not buy it. They will click unfollow. So you have to provide value in some way, shape, or form. And that's something that we're really going to dive heavily into in the classes. How to provide value, what types of value you can provide on social media, and how to connect that with your goal and really define what your goals are, and then how to move that through the content and put that out there and then connect with your audience on a really, really relatable level so that they continue to engage with you, not only right now, but eventually buying your book and then your future books as well.
That's great, Jandra. Thank you. I'm back. So now I want to dive in a little bit into one of my favorite topics, which is publicity, building buzz using PR publicity and press rooms. I promised you 3 tips to get started, which I will get to in a moment, but I want to tell you a little bit about what this animal actually is. It can be very daunting, especially to new authors. But what it is making news. It's working with the news media to get mentions, to get reviews, features, and it goes beyond literary press. Now, I mentioned I come from a traditional PR background, so I'm used to working with the morning news shows, Great Day Houston, Good Morning Texas, major newspapers, major radio, not the literary press, which you need, obviously. But there is a way, even if you have a fiction book, to get some visibility with the media if you do it right. And one of the reasons I'm such a proponent of what I think is one of the most underutilized tool in the book marketing field is because book publicity and PR is one of the most effective, and it can be one of the most cost-effective ways to raise your profile as an author. It levels the playing field. It allows you to compete. If you can get on a morning TV show, then you can level the playing field with somebody else, maybe from a big 5 that has a big PR team behind them, and it makes you look just as big as they are. And maybe you're not there yet, but you will be soon. So it also gives you instant credibility. So if you get an interview, for instance, say on, I'm from Dallas originally, and Think is a local Dallas PBS radio program. If you get an interview on Think with Chris Boyd, you're basically getting an endorsement from the host. So that's a huge endorsement. And think about the audience. That's a huge audience. So it would take a pretty big paid advertising campaign to get the kind of reach and targeted reach, because all she does is interview authors on that kind of a station. So, and it's basically free. So it gives you instant credibility, and it's cost effective, and you can reuse it. It adds to your credibility, and you can multiply that. And Jandra's going to talk a little bit about how to broaden your reach when you do get coverage. And that's really one of the keys. And that's really one of the reasons you want to do it. Media builds on media. So start small and then let that build. And just a little tidbit. Nobody wants to be the first television producer to interview you because they don't know if you can do a good interview. So, a little trick that we do is if you haven't gotten a radio or television interview yet, then set one up. Do a mock interview and record it, put it in your press kit on your website. And we'll talk about more about what goes in that press kit in just a second. But the three things that you must have before you start a publicity campaign, and I mentioned you can do some of this yourself because not every author is going to have a budget to hire a publicist or a PR firm. PR by the Book is one of the best, I think, literary PR firms in the country, but they're not cheap. And you can also maximize any work that you do with them if you get prepared first. So one of the first things you have to do is have a well thought out strategy. Know your story and know your audience. Who are you? What are you trying to say? What is your key messaging? I have spent hours with clients just honing their message. What is your message? Because if you're not clear about that, you cannot get the attention of a writer or producer, some other journalist, because you have to be clear and you have to know who you're trying to reach, and you need to understand their audience too. You must have a brand, and it goes across all of these platforms. Your book cover, logos, your website is central, and your social media. And you must have before you start a campaign, you must have a press kit and a press room, preferably online and printed. When in the course, we'll talk to you about how to use that press kit. There are a lot of uses for it, actually. And then I have another one is, you have to have compelling hooks. These are the angles for your press releases. And journalists they like to keep things simple. You're always trying to help them do their job. They're always on deadline. And when you can give them things that make their job easy, you're going to be more likely to get covered. So a compelling hook lists, the 5 top reasons you should not let your child play with their phone, before going to bed. Tips are great. Tie-ins with current news. National Yoga Month. There's a month for everything. And I have a story about how we turned the National Handwriting Day into National Handwriting Month because we didn't have enough time for media interviews, so we just made it a month. But there's a day for everything, and tie into that. A little success story that we recently had as of yesterday. My client, the first client that we published under BBL Publishing, she was on Great Day Houston as a co-guest, her first time a couple of years ago. Then we did a big push for suicide prevention and National Bullying Month, in which she's an expert. And so then she was on again. And 2 days ago, she got a call from the producer saying, could you please come back and do another interview? And of course, the answer is yes, because they know she's a good interview. And this again goes back to media builds on media. So you've got to have a compelling list and angles and a compelling hook. So, and really hone your message. Okay, so those are the things that you need before you get started. We have a PR starter kit for that very reason, because I see so many authors going online and finding these packages to send out a press release. Well, number one press release is not going to do you any good. I take that back. It will do some good because it's a place to start. But when you pay $300, $700 for a one-time release that's really just a book announcement and send it out, you're not going to get the kind of results that I think you probably want. You're doing a shotgun blast, and you're probably going to be disappointed when it doesn't get the coverage that you want. So you need a good press release, a good strategy, and good press materials in order to do that. Okay. Press kits and press rooms. Now, I mentioned this before. Basically, what you're trying to do is make the journalist's job easy. They're overworked. They're on deadline. If they can go to your website and find everything they need with one click, then you're going to be more likely for them to interview you and to get coverage. Okay. It is the marketing package for your brand. You put all of your marketing materials in there, everything in one place. Now, it really doesn't matter if you get the cover of Time magazine, but having a press kit and sending out press releases makes you newsworthy. They see that. If someone sees, oh, there's a press release, they must be newsworthy. They don't know if one person picked it up or 500 journalists picked it up and wrote about you. It also allows you to control your message. So you are controlling the messaging. You're telling people what you're about and what's important about your book or about what you're doing. And it's not just for journalists. It's for bookstores, for other buyers, conference organizers, if you're a speaker, and the general public. It's one place where they can go and see a lot of things with one click. So that's why I'm a big proponent for online press rooms. Okay. I'm not going to go into a lot of this. You can see there's a lot that goes into a press kit, and basically it's never finished and you update it as you go. When you get that first little community article, a review about your book, you put it in your press room. Any press release you send out, you should have sample chapters and a synopsis. Another way to control the message is a sample Q&A. I have literally had television reporters on a major network, a couple of major networks, read every question on air that I gave them to my authors, and of course we already had the answer. So it was a great interview because we made their job easy. So these are some of the things that we're going to talk about and help you develop. But again, a press kit is never finished and you update it. And then people can always access it, get what they need, high resolution photos, and sample interviews so they can see that you're a good interview. If you're not a good interview, we have media training. That's important. So that's basically what a press kit is and what you need to think about putting in it. Now, the number one mistake that authors make when contacting the media is very simple. It's not giving them news. I've alluded to this before about your hooks and angles. And a lot of these sites where you will purchase a press release and it's really just a press announcement of your book and the fact that you wrote a book, which is a huge accomplishment and kudos to you, but it is not news. Some of the community newspapers, and you should start there, it is news to them. So again, you have to think about the audience of the media outlet that you are approaching. What do those readers, what do those viewers, what do those listeners of the radio show, what do they want to hear? Okay, and again, do your research before you approach the media. There are a lot of tips that I can give you. In fact, I have a whole tip sheet on how to approach the media, their top 5 ways to approach them. But we don't have time to do that at the moment. But always, regardless of how you contact them, be professional. Use a publicist if at all possible, and that can even be your husband or wife. It is just a lot easier if someone calls on your behalf and says, I'm Fred's publicist and I think you should do a story on it. Okay? So Jandra's going to talk a little bit about how to elevate your reach and extend your PR.
So one of the great things about social media is that it gives you an opportunity to loop these things all together. So we talked about how your website is kind of your home base for all of this information, but social media helps you extend the shelf life of all of this stuff that you're doing, all of your PR efforts, all of your branding efforts, because you can continue to share it. So once you've had a media hit, no matter how big or how small, you can then share about it on social media. And that might sound like, oh gosh, like what good is that going to do? It's because you don't just share it once. So a lot of media hits are evergreen. And what evergreen media hits mean is that it's something that's relevant all the time. Obviously, there are some that are specific around an angle, or maybe they're very timely, and those aren't evergreen. But if you have a topic that's more general, like parenting tips for teenagers, that's something that people are always going to be interested in. So you don't just share that media hit once. And I'm not saying you share it, 10 times over the next 2 days, but you can share it the next week, maybe saying, hey, did you miss my awesome interview on this news network? You should check it out for some great tips on parenting for teenagers or something like that. And the other thing that you want to make sure that you do, and this is probably one of the biggest mistakes that authors make, is make sure that the media outlet, no matter how big or small, has your social media links and ask them to tag you in their posts. The reason why, as we talked about this earlier, is we want to capitalize on pre-existing audiences. So if you only have 100, 500, 1,000 followers, but you're going to be interviewed by a blogger who has 50,000 followers, and they share a link to your interview on their platforms, what happens if you're not tagged in them? If you're not tagged in them, it's not easy for their followers to then find you and follow you. And don't get me wrong, it's great to get a media hit, but just because you've gotten a media hit on Fox News or on another major news network, that's not a guarantee that you're going to turn around and sell 100,000 copies of your book. We actually saw it all the time when I worked at PR by the Book. There would be someone on Fox News, for example, and the next day, no major uptick in sales. And that's because there's a little known rule that's not so little known, that it takes someone more than once to see something before they're going to buy it. Generally speaking, most people have to see a product 6 or 7 times online before they're actually going to click buy. So that's not to say that you can just go tweet out the link to your book 6 or 7 times a day, because like we said earlier, that's all you're doing, and people aren't going to click buy, they're going to click on follow. But what it does mean is that you want to introduce and then reintroduce you, your topic, your brand to these audiences as much as you can. And by connecting a pre-existing audience to yours, and yes, if they were to read the blogger's blog post, they'll find your name, and if they're really interested, they'll search you. But that is a little more time consuming, and yes, some people will do it. But you have to think about today's society, and you have to think about how attention spans are dwindling and how most people don't want to click out of an application. So you want to lower the barrier of entry, make it easier for them to get from point A, which is the blog post or the media hit, to point B, which is following you and or buying your book. So we want to reduce the number of steps between those two things and make it as simple as possible. And that's why it's really important to coordinate with whatever media hit that you're getting to make sure that they're connecting to your social platforms as well. And then also, sharing on social media just helps to reinforce your brand. As your social media continues to grow, more and more journalists and blogs and things like that, they're going to check you out. They're going to see if you're legitimate. They're going to see if you've got some followers. And whether or not legitimacy is tied into the number of followers you have, which not technically, there is the concept of social proof. And what that means is that people with higher numbers of followers are going to be perceived as more legitimate. So if someone has 1,000 Facebook followers, they're going to be seen as more legitimate, whether or not they actually are, than someone who only has 10 or 50 or even 100. So that's something that can be really useful and something that authors can capitalize on, and that's why social media can be so, so powerful in elevating your reach and making PR last longer, because as we talked about earlier and as Leanne mentioned, you start small and grow from there, and PR hits can snowball. So maybe you've got a small social media following and you start sharing your original hits. Well, maybe they start picking up some steam and other people start sharing them, and then another journalist sees it and they're interested in you because that was a really great interview. So that just goes to show that it can really pay off in the long term.
That's great, Jandra. I really liked what you said about that an interview is not a guarantee of increased sales, and unless you're on Oprah or Good Morning America, then you're probably not going to see a tick. You might, but there are a lot of things that you can also do in an interview to drive people to your website to maybe see a tick. But again, what we're really talking about with PR is building that credibility and raising your profile. So you use those as tools to do that, and then it will build, as you say, and then you'll start getting more buzz, and then hopefully reach critical mass. Timing is very critical, and that is it brings us to a couple of points. So we're up at the top of the hour almost. We did start a little bit late, so we're going to run through our launch section fairly quickly, and if I want to save a couple of minutes for Q&A, but if you have any other questions that we don't get to tonight because we ran a little bit long, then feel free to email us and just send us a question. We'll be happy to answer that for you. But let's talk quickly about elements of a successful launch. Timing is really the key to all of this. there are a lot of activities that you can do, and it can be overwhelming to launch your book. But minimum 6 months out, you need to start. You need to begin planning for all of the different elements that hopefully will all build together. And then when you pull that trigger, it will just be a big blast, and a lot of things will start clicking. And 6 months is a critical time frame because, number one, for traditional reviews, you have to have your ARCs, your advanced reader copies, in the hands of the traditional reviewers, Publishers Weekly, some of the Library Journal, and some other reviewers online and off, for a minimum of 4 months, but ideally 6 months prior to publication of your book. Okay, you can pay for reviews after the fact, but they don't have as much credibility. You need to schedule your events, start scheduling your events 3 to 4 months out. I would recommend online and offline events if you have the opportunity. We'll talk a little bit in the course about the tricks to getting a Barnes & Noble book signing. It's not as hard as you think, and I recommend that everybody do it. Doesn't mean that your book is carried on the shelves at Barnes & Noble, but for the optics of having that book signing at Barnes & Noble, it can be very beneficial. And it's kind of cool to walk into the store and see your poster and your book up there, in the front room. So, Jandra, you want to talk about how social media and some of these other things come together for the launch?
Yeah. So what we recommend is, for PR, obviously you need about 6 months advance lead time to prepare for your launch of your book. And for social media, ideally 6 months is great, because that means that you can start growing your audience if you don't have an audience already. We like to say that we need a minimum of 2 to 3 months for social media book launch. And the reason why is that a lot of times it means that we need to start growing an audience if you don't already have one, or retooling your social media accounts if they're just personal up until this point, or if we need to work on rebranding, changing imagery up, a lot of different things. And then there's other things and other puzzle pieces that we want to put into play. And this goes into the second point really well, where we're talking about you need to prioritize where you focus your attention for maximum results. And I mentioned this earlier where I talked about your ROI, and that return on investment is your time. So the reason why we want 2 to 3 months lead time is so we can really figure out where you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck. And that buck being your time. So is it going to be a blog tour? Is it going to be a Twitter chat? Is it going to be something else? That's really something that you want to start planning as early as possible. So that way you're not overwhelmed when the book launch comes, and then, or flip side, the book launch comes and goes and you're just like, well, now what? My book's out and I didn't do anything for it. And now I don't know how to generate interest. That being said, if your book is already out, that's okay. There's still ways to bring attention back to your book. We just like to talk about getting as much advance notice as possible and starting as early as possible. And this might be something that you can't do for this book, but it might be something you can do for your next book. And you can still apply these lessons to a current book, to a book that's either coming out in the next week or month or has already come out. And a lot of this can be very, very useful for those as well. It's just about figuring out what things you should be focusing on that tie into your goals, like we talked about earlier, and see the maximum results. And then what you want to do is you want to use social media to bring it all back around. You want to promote your events, and then after events, you want to share pictures from your events. You want to do ads that amplify the reach about the upcoming event so that more and more people can see it. And share reviews and generate more interest and ask for more reviews and get your audience tied in. And this is something that, this third point is where it really comes in after the book has already been launched. Right before launch, like the week before, and then after, you're going to be using social media to use everything that you've already been working on for the past 6 months to extend the buzz around your book. Because really, you only have a couple of months after your books come out to make a big impact from a traditional publisher standpoint. But if you're doing things correctly, using social media, using PR, you can still generate this interest over the long term, even if your book has already been out. Obviously, there are some limitations if you have a book that was published in 2003 and you're trying to get a media hit now as a current new book. That's not going to work very well because your book is dated. But if your book's only been out for a month or two, you can still be using social media. You can still be using PR and to generate more interest, even if it's already come out. So, yeah.
Unless that book that was published in 2003 has a very timely news hook, and then you can rejuvenate it.
Yeah.
And I've seen a lot of authors do that very successfully. Another thing is pre-sales. Make sure that you do pre-sales if you have the opportunity, because those sales actually count on the day that the book is published, that it's released. Okay, so you get to count all of those numbers on that one day, so that can help with your rankings and so forth. And with PR, you need 3 to 6 months minimum to start building that momentum and get things in place. Okay, so I hope you've enjoyed this, and if you need more, join us for our 3-week online course, Build Book Buzz, and we're going to start on July 6th. That'll be for 90 minutes or so. We'll try to keep it prompt on July 6th, July 13th, and July 20th. And I'll be sending everyone a link to register in case you need more. And this was just a little taste of what you're going to be learning. And we're going to dive a lot deeper into these topics during that 3-week period. So for each of you who is here today, you get a discount, and then the regular price is $147. Your discount is $108. We'll meet once a week for 90 minutes with fellow authors, and we're going to bring in some special guests for you too, based on the topics that we're talking about. Jandra, do you have anything to add for that?
No, but like Leanne said, if there's any questions that maybe we don't have time to answer, you can reach out to us. You can send us an email. You can check out buildbuzzlaunch.com for more information on the different services that Leanne offers and about the webinar as well, or the upcoming class as well. And then you can also follow us on social media. For me, particularly, my social media handle is Jandra Lee across all platforms. So that's Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, and my website. So it's really easy to find me.
It's very well branded
on there. And then I've also got a lot of tips and tricks for authors and just talking about the book industry and marketing and writing and things like that as well.
That's great. We do have one question, and I'm going to answer it, sort of. How to set up a book interview with a radio talk show in Houston. I happen to know how to do that. And those 3 things that I mentioned, and we'll give you a recording of this presentation as well. But you've got to have your messaging, your press release, and do your research and make sure that what you're pitching to the radio program is appropriate for their audience. Think about the journalist and the audience, not yourself. Okay, so maybe that helped. Okay, thanks again, everyone, and we hope to see you soon. We're going to be doing more of these free webinars on different topics. There's so much to learn and so much for us to share with you. And then we're going to be doing more of these courses as well. So hope you'll stay in touch and hope to see you soon. And here's to your publishing success. Thanks.